Yo,
Megalo Box has to be by far one of my favorite animes that has come out this year, and a large aspect of that has to do with how different this show felt during the Spring Anime 2018 lineup. From its old school style that you would find in any 90s anime from years on back, to the feeling of it being a sports anime mixed with layers of science fiction and steampunk. For a show like this, it was because of these aspects that it presented itself that made me enjoy the series altogether, and made it stand out as it was accompanied by other series during the season it was released. If I could pinpoint on why I liked the series and why its particular aesthetic worked for what it was, it stemmed from how it wasn't afraid to take a popular manga like Ashita no Joe, or Tomorrow's Joe, and modernize it for its current audiences, as well as doing its own thing that could differentiate itself from the original, while keeping the spirit of the original manga intact. But I think it's only fair to talk about my experience in watching the series and talk about why I myself enjoy it, and why I grew attached to this world and its cast of characters. Overall, talking about why I like Megalo Box. My experience with sports anime is definitely one of enjoyment and excitement. As someone who could care less about actual sports in real life, and who you would probably find sleeping from watching a football game, sports anime seemed to always appeal to me because of how it approached the sports of its respected genre, and the characters you would follow and see grow from playing the sport. One of my favorite sports anime, Hajime no Ippo, displays this concept best in my opinion, as you were able to see its characters grow from the sport they would be competing in and following their development through a natural progression, as well as feeling each sense of victory and defeat that the characters would experience. This is definitely not an exception. Megalo Box is a remake of the classic legendary boxing manga Ashita no Joe, set in a futuristic society and setting. Megalo Boxing is presented as the most popular sport in the world, where instead of just normal boxing gloves, competitors are equipped with mechanical frames attached to their backs that help give their attacks more lethal power, and thus making the sport all the more dangerous. We then are introduced to our main character Joe, a competitor of an underground Megalo boxing fighting ring, who wishes for more out of himself from this sport than just fixed matches where he gets paid for fights he throws away. One thing this show captivated me from the first time watching it was how it was able to take the concept of boxing from a popular old sports manga and retelling it in a futuristic concept with this mechanical technology that the boxers wear every time they fight, and telling it in a modernized setting. With other anime titles like Devilman Crybaby, what they excelled on was being able to take on an old series from years ago and being able to retell it in a way that modernizes the series for newer audiences, but also keep the spirit of the original intact, where you can tell this has the same feel as its predecessor. Megalo Box showcases this concept even more so by having a more grainy frame rate and an old school style of animation that is reminiscent of 90s anime, while also looking modernized enough to feel new and fresh. Each frame from this show has a look to it that feels like you were watching an old school anime from the 90s, and it has a unique style to it where you can tell it's trying to be its own thing while also being reminiscent of the original Ashita no Joe manga. This is one of the reasons why I really enjoyed this series while watching it, not just because of how its old school design and style presented itself, or the gorgeous mixture of futuristic and urban society that it sets in, but how it felt different than other animes that came out during the same time as this did. It feels unique in its own way and it feels different. It feels like something you really wouldn't expect in today's age of anime. However, what really sold me on this series was not only the world it presented itself in, but the characters whom I grew attached to. In the forefront of that was the main character Joe. Joe, while being clearly talented in the sport of Megalo boxing, is always forced to throw away matches that are fixed from the start and is almost never given an opportunity to prove himself in the ring and be the best that he can be. Joe feels like there's nothing but a constant stagnation in his life and wishes for there to be more than just wasted fights he gets paid to lose in. It's not until he meets Yuri, a Megalo boxing champion, and loses against him in the ring that he starts desiring more out of his life than what's been given to him and wants to move up to the ranks of legitimate Megalo boxing so that he can face off against Yuri in a rematch in a tournament called Megalonia. What I like about Joe's character and why I think he's basically the soul and heart of the show is how, for all intents and purposes, he represents the very meaning of an underdog in a story. In the beginning, he's constantly being berated by his trainer Nanbu that both him and Joe won't ever be able to even dream of making it out of the slumps and making it big in professional Megalo boxing, because it's a pipe dream for people like them to even dream about that kind of future. This is what I really enjoyed about Joe's character. Throughout the show, we see every other character refer to Joe as nothing more than a junk dog, trying to bite off more than he can chew, and is seen as idiotic for even trying to make it big, when he himself came from absolutely nothing. which for the most part it's mostly true. Throughout the show, we never really get Joe's backstory on how he became the person that he is, and only get snippets of ideas on how his past might have been. Yet for Joe, he never really paid any attention to the people who doubted him or his worth, and is forced to believe not only in his friends but in himself that he is worthy to contend in the big leagues of Megalonia, which is showcased in the fact that in the series he is the only contender competing in Megalonia without any gear, thus earning him the name Gearless Joe. Joe is the bona fide definition of an underdog. In most of his fights, he nearly gets beaten down brutally by opponents with gears of their own, and is able to come out on top with not only the help of his friends by his corner, but by his undeniable competitive will to not give up. For Joe, it isn't a matter of just proving to everyone else that he is the real deal when it comes to being a competitor, but believing in himself that he is so much more than where he came before, where he was constantly throwing away matches that were fixed and following other people's orders without any consideration for what he wanted or desired. To me, these were aspects of Joe's character that I really enjoyed and thought these characteristics represented a theme for the show altogether. Being able to strive for more than the environment you grew up in, and achieving greatness and worth through your own strength and determination. Joe is undeniably the heart and spirit of what a traditional boxer really is, where in a world where normal professional boxing is replaced with mechanical enhancements that turn the sport into a more deadlier version of what came before, Joe is the only one who represents the true definition of the word boxer, being able to push on through each opponent through grit and will, and being able to get back up whenever someone brings you down. He doesn't get in the ring for money or fame, but because he genuinely enjoys the sport and can't imagine a life without it. Joe being gearless isn't just used as a gimmick to garner him popularity and uniqueness in the eyes of the world, but it also captures the essence on why in a world where technology has advanced boxing to such a degree where it's almost unrecognizable by old standards, Joe personifies the actual meaning on what traditional boxing used to stand for. And I loved that. The fact that someone who came from absolutely nothing and started out with nothing was able to compete with top competitors because of his own boxing spirit that seems forgotten in a world like Megalo Box.
なぜギアをつけない？なぜ生身で戦うことにこだわるんだ？
最初は治るためのただのハッタリだった。でも今はそうじゃねえ。リングに上がるたびこいつにてめえの命をかけるんだ。死ぬほどおっかねえけどそいつがたまらなく面白いんだよ。俺はあんたとかけねなしの試合がしてんだ。あんたとだったらどこまでも行けそうな気がしてよ。
I feel like it would be a crime to not also mention another main thing that this series is known for and what made it stood out for its particular style and aesthetic, which is its use of rap songs in its OST. Using talents from well-known Japanese artists like Mabanua, DJ Baku, and Michael Kaneko, the series uses rapping to convey an aesthetic and energy that really reminded me of other anime series like Samurai Champloo, where it uses rap-style music to not only convey a feel that distinguishes itself as an anime, but also uses it to tell a story about its characters and its world. The use of rap-style music, accompanied by the visuals we see in Megalo Box, really gives you a sense on how these two things combined sets off a picture on how the world of Megalo Box is seen from the other characters, more specifically in the urban and poverty side of the city where Megalo Box is set in. Contrasting the rural environment of the slums to the advanced architecture around the cities, it illustrates that those who are less privileged than people who are more wealthy have to survive day in and day out in this type of environment, and how citizens who dream of escaping from this kind of life are almost stuck, which is translated through this show's rapping OST. That's what I think made Megalo Box work so well. How the songs it used during the moments of the series that was trying to convey a certain message or story that illustrated a situation or a character's mindset. It's a great combination of using music and visual representation to convey these characters' inner struggles of trying to fight back against the tide of pain and agony they are feeling, and trying to move past what has happened to them before, and moving forward towards a better tomorrow. Joe's character isn't the only thing that carries the show, as it's also its cast of other engaging characters that really makes the show shine on its own, specifically its main trio, Sachio, Nanbu, and Joe. What's interesting about their dynamic is that for all intents and purposes, each character has their own main goal that they want to achieve, with their own selfish desires and ambitions on how they want to achieve them. For Joe, it's being able to fight Yuri again in a bigger stage than in the underground ring that prompts him to rise up in the ranks of Megalonia and defeat any opponent that comes his way. His trainer Nambu helps Joe at first in order to save his own skin from a loan shark who threatens to kill him and Joe if they don't pay him what they owe. And Sachio helps Joe and Nambu out because he wants to avenge his father's death and move on from the past he still lingered to. Even when they all have their own individual goals to strive for, you still feel a sense of camaraderie from these characters and feel like they actually care about each other not only as teammates, but as friends. For Joe, this is the first time he's ever had people in his corner who he could look to for guidance and support, and he's never really had anyone in his life who believed in him. There was Nambu, who took him in as his student and agreed to coach him as his trainer, but all the fights he had fought before he competed for Megalonia were only for other people's profit. This also rings true for both Nambu and Sachio. While they admit to themselves that at first they only agreed to help Joe enter Megalonia in order to achieve their own ambitions, that changes throughout the show as you see these three bond more than teammates, but also as a family of people who have come from nothing and fight in order to escape the situations life have dealt them. They aren't the only ones who have their own goals to aspire, however, as other characters in the show are also shown to use Megalonia as a means to further their own desires and have their own reasons for doing so. Yuri in the beginning sees Joe as nothing more than a regular street thug who fought in illegitimate fights, but it isn't until he fights him that he sees someone who carries the spirit of a real boxer and who could pose a real challenge to him. At first he fought only to repay a debt to the people who helped him achieve the success he has had for a while, but that changes when he meets Joe. Like him, he fights in the ring not only because he enjoys the sport, but because it's the only place in the world where he really feels like he could prove his own worth and ability through challenging strong opponents. That's why when he is finally able to fight Joe in the finals, he takes it upon himself to have his gear surgically removed from his body and risk facing death at his door. Besides some of the boxers who we really only get to see in a few episodes and don't really get any backstory for them, every other character sets out a clear destination in their minds that they want to achieve by using Megalo Boxing as a means to get where they want to go. And what really intrigues me about that aspect of the show was how even their own selfish desires sometimes came into conflict with what other characters desired themselves. Yukiko, who is the head of the Shirado Corporation and the forefront spokesperson for Megalonia, uses Yuri's adept ability in Megalo Boxing to show off her company's own version of a gear, where then she could sell and distribute them for the military. For her, Megalo Boxing was just a means to not only further the sport as a legitimate profession, but also where she could use it to further her own company's technology and use it for the betterment of others. While her intentions could be considered admirable in itself, it's not only when Yuri decides to remove his own gear in order to fight Joe that she voices her own discontent of the idea, and at first thinks about the implications of how this would affect her, and not what Yuri wanted. It's not until she finally sees Yuri's resolve and sees how much he was willing to sacrifice for this one fight that she gives into what he wanted and lets him go as a Shirato's fighter, which is a great parallel to how Nambu tells Joe in episode 11 to fight not for others, but for himself, and how he lets Joe go of all the shackles that stopped him from doing what he wanted to do and fight to his heart's content. Each character is guilty of wanting something that they cannot gain by themselves, and sometimes it clashes with other characters' goals and desires, which is something that I thought was really interesting, that the anime would present this type of conflict with its characters and parallels each of them through those conflicts. More so than just fighting to achieve your goals, the main theme that Megalo Box conveys through its characters and fights is the idea of moving on from the past in order to create a better tomorrow. And I think the one character who exemplifies this concept the most and who gains the most development because of it is Nambu. In the beginning of the show, Nambu is shown to be someone who is hesitant to go against the flow. For him, tomorrow wasn't really something he gave a real consideration for because he was always too busy thinking about how to survive today. He fixes Joe's matches at the behest of the owner of the underground Megalo Boxing arena because for him, it's the only way to survive and get by without being killed. He doesn't view himself as a good person and has an opinion of himself as someone who would stab anyone in the back if it was to save his own self. It's not until they go through the ranks of Megalonia that we see Nambu's character and mindset gradually change. What I enjoyed about Nambu's development was how through his achievements with Joe and Sachio was how he was able to move on to something better than what he perceived his own nature to be. Someone who lies and deceits in order to gain what he wants, and would trample anyone if it was for his own benefit. But it's through bonding with his teammates that he learns the value of fighting to escape one's own past and to move forward because of it. so much so that he is willing to blind himself in order to protect Joe and free him from the influence of the loan shark that, for all intents and purposes, held his life and freedom in his hands. What I liked about Nambu's character growth was how it personifies the idea of fighting to make it to tomorrow, without being shackled to the past and being able to move on because of it, which is a core theme in Megalo Box. Being able to go on towards a tomorrow, even if you have no idea what might come of it, and making sure you fought hard to make that tomorrow better than what came before. And honestly, as someone who tries to leave the past behind, and who works hard in thinking about not only in today but in tomorrow, this was a theme that I could really relate to on a personal level. And I can imagine it's a lesson that people who feel like they can't move on from their own demons or problems can gravitate towards, and understand that as long as you get back up and move forward, you will have a future. Megalo Box definitely became the sleeper hit of the season, and I think it's because of how old school this show feels, while still being modern enough for anime fans today. And I think that's one of the reasons why I liked it so much after my first time watching it, and why I was able to appreciate its uniqueness and what it presented. Joe, by all accounts, goes from a no-name fighter in the beginning to becoming a world champion by the end and finally realizing his dream of seeing a tomorrow worth fighting for. And I think that's an important aspect to take away from this anime. Seeing a normal tale of an underdog story and watching this character grow into something amazing because of it, and fighting for a future because of it. Or in this case, a better future for an average Joe. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching the video. It was a lot of fun to make and I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to check out my other 2 videos on my channel if you hadn't had a chance to do that either. And if you'd like to see more videos like this where I give my thoughts on anime series that I like, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I also have a Twitter at AlexMercerST if you guys want to follow me there. And thank you guys so much for watching the video, I really appreciate it. Be sure to leave me your thoughts on the video if you can, and I'll see you guys next time.